Hi everybody, nice to see you all. I have survived. The race was intense. The problem was the weather was completely screwed up. We were told it's going to be warm around 40 degrees, but the race started around 40 degrees and within half an hour turned deep blizzard and minus something like 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything iced up, and everybody took at least an extra hour because you just can't, it was gliding, sliding all over the place. But I managed to persevere somehow and finish at exact time that I was planning to be maximum time. So, yeah, that's basically the story. I will say that if anybody interested about the whole history here, I highly recommend you to watch the movie called The Lost King. Um, It's on, I think it's on Amazon. I don't think it's on Netflix, but it's on Amazon Prime. It's about the story of the Prince Haakon. It's a Norwegian movie that was made in 2016 about the whole experience. And so the race is exactly the track that two skiers took the prince to save his life when he was a baby. And because of that, we had to carry a 7-pound backpack as a memory of that, so to speak. So yeah, movie is really interesting. It's there's a lot of skiing in the movie, which in that area. So they they made the movie, they shot the movie right there, so you can also see the landscape and the landscape of how the movie went. Well, yeah, so I had to stop the and participate in CPR because there was a guy who had a heart attack and had a cardiac arrest. So I tried to look up if he survived, but I couldn't find any information. Hopefully he did. So yeah, I had to stop multiple times for various reasons. I was planning on keep moving and just having my own hydration and my own food in the backpack, but it wasn't unrealistic because it was so long and so cold. I had to stop at every hydration station, take something, and there was one station with coffee. I think that's totally saved me. It was a hot coffee. So with that, actually, there's a small update. So because the experience was so good and I had such a good time with the team and the coach, coach and I and Janet's going to do a podcast on the health benefits of skiing next week. So it'll be on our podcast platform, I guess, in a couple of weeks after. We'll give you guys update on that. I think we're going to talk a lot about I think for me, it's not just physical activity. I think being in the nature this way, in the winter, in the silence of the snow. I think if you never experienced it, it's hard to understand it. It's not possible to explain it until you sense that control movement, and especially when it's not really busy. I mean, it's one thing doing a race with thousands of people, but it's different when you have a track, there are a few people, it's quiet, it's silent. The nature is sleeping mostly, so it's a very transcendental experience, I would say. Um, oh, thanks, Steph. So I'll be doing a healthy aging presentation at um, for Minnesota. It's on Zoom, so there's a link. I think sign up is free or by donation, so feel free to join if you want. Um, what else? The quick updates. Steph will give you also a link if you still want to support the fundraiser for the race. We'll put the link in there. Then I finally put a couple of things on YouTube. So the conversation with Peter about failure of our healthcare system, he just recently wrote a book about that. It's on YouTube. So I'm gonna find you a link. It's the video called Broken System, Dr. Peter Cowley. And the book is called, let me see, I put the link in there. It was a very good conversation, I think. The book is based on cases. So you have a case that describes particular failure of the healthcare system in a given aspect, and then he explains how can you get around that problem. More than half of a book about Medicare, about all kinds of problems with Medicare, why certain things exist the way they are. So he's a very senior cardiologist for many decades, and basically collected this information gradually over decades. And I think the book is excellent. So I really was honored that he asked me to do the podcast with him. So you can watch it in recording in there. And if you have any questions, by the way, when you subscribe to YouTube, or if you don't even you watch, you can always ask the question. There's a place in YouTube videos where you can put the comment. I don't respond to them quickly because I don't check this very often, but once a week I would check. So I'll respond to the comment, and it often other people respond because it just stays there. It's in the community. So. All right, that's an update. Now let me do a couple of minutes of actual health-related issues. First and foremost, let's start with something clinically related to the COVID. I don't have any acute COVID updates, but here's the data that vitamin D substantially decreases risk of long COVID. So the dosing that they used in the study was a little weird. They used 9,000 units for 2 days at the onset of acute COVID, and after that, 3,600 a day for up to 2 weeks. I don't know. There's no 9,000 unit capsules. Like you're not going to buy them. So, but it makes a lot of sense to sort of mimic this. So what I would suggest for everybody, always have 5,000 unit vitamin D in a house. And when and if you get COVID, and by the way, this relates probably to every acute illness, whether it's COVID, flu, cold, I don't care what it is. You can take 10,000 units for a few days. You don't have to take it for a long time. Like I would say, they did it for 2 days. I saw some naturopaths recommend up to 5 to 7 days. You make a choice. I don't think it matters. But take 10,000 units for a few days. After that, take 5,000 units for a while. It does not matter what your level is. This is really important. It's not level based. This is an acute treatment of an infection where vitamin D helps the immune system to fight off the virus better. So that's probably what the benefit. And benefit was quite substantial. There was no improvement in an acute COVID. So the length of acute COVID was the same in everybody. But there was a substantial decrease in long COVID. Let me give you an exact percentage. 25% decrease in an onset of the long COVID. So, it's 25% drop with something that as simple as vitamin D. So I think that's a very welcomed intervention there. Okay, so if you want to geek out on the study, be my guest. I put the link in there. Okay, so that's one thing. So then growing evidence of use of olive oil therapeutically for prevention and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Lots of new data. Basically, turns out that for what's fascinating, it appears that olive oil probably improves chances or decreases chance of Alzheimer's and improves the treatment, not based on the actual oil itself, but on improvement of a gut health. So it improves microbiome. So I'll put you the link to that. Take a look. This is intuitive. I think in our memory program in our patients, we give everybody lots of olive oil, at least 1 or 2 tablespoons a day. Idea is very simple. You want to increase good quality fats, and the thought previously had nothing to do with gut. Previously, the idea was, okay, well, brain is a fatty tissue and you need to feed it good fat. Like it's a very loose statement, but that's how everybody operated. Nowadays, it's starting to get more and more clarified as we go. So again, this is also highlights the value of Mediterranean diet for prevention and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. But in essence, this is concrete data. So take a look at that. All right, I think that's probably enough for today. So we can do Q&A for next 15 minutes or so, or whatever time we have. Last update about the videos. let me give you I finally summarized the study looking at treatment of Alzheimer's disease with cannabis that showed dramatic benefit. This is a Brazilian study using, it's not a mini dosing, it's a micro dosing. So it's so small, no one ever takes this. So I will try to emulate this. If anybody is interested, and the result was dramatic. I mean, patients with moderate Alzheimer's improved 30%. It sounds too good to be true. Um, I don't know what to tell you, but it makes a lot of sense. It's some kind of a hermetic message, meaning that a microdose of our endogenous substance must be modulating memory so profoundly better than higher doses. That's not how traditionally we think about endocannabinoid system. And the cannabinoid system generally thought to be J-curved. So at the very low dose of something, it's doing nothing, and then you have to reach a certain peak for it to work. This seems to fit out of the pattern. So I will have access to, I have a company that can manufacture this exact product for us. So if anybody interested, you need to contact me, and you're not going to feel anything. You're not going to get a high. You're not going to have any side effects. The dose is 0.35 milligram of THC. Most people will start feeling THC at around 2 to 5 milligrams. This is 1/10 to 1/20th of a minimum dose that shows any benefit of any kind in prior studies. So it's not a mini dose, it's microdose. And then there's even less CBD, 0.25 milligrams, not 200, not 100, not 0.25 milligrams. It's micrograms. So we have a product set up in the next couple of weeks. If anybody is concerned about their memory and want to try it, it's just going to be a couple of drops a day, and we'll give it a go. I mean, I think this is something that has to be replicated ASAP, because if it's true, it's going to be super cheap and, one of the probably most important changes in our. I've been talking about this for a long time. Those of you who've been following my work, I've told everybody for many years that cannabis will become a cure of Alzheimer's in our lifetime. So this is a first study that demonstrating a possible connection. So no, there's no reason to believe that Gundry is saying any truth. Olive oil is olive oil. It's all a bunch of bullshit. It's a lie. You can concentrate olive oil. There's no real point to it. What you don't want to do, you don't want to take a very cheap olive oil, especially you don't want to take non-organic olive oil, and you have to be careful with making sure it's extra virgin. And I think any decent sources of quality, it just needs to be high quality olive oil. Now, does it matter, that particular influencer markets it? No, it does not. And the fact that somebody say my olive oil is better than others, I would never trust something like this. It's a commercial gimmick. They're selling products. You want to believe them, be my guest. Yeah, probably first cold pressed. Okay. So they saw a benefit instantly within the first couple of days of treatment. Again, no one felt anything. But they saw a separation of the line starting almost instantaneously, like within first week or two. And then I think the study was lasted for 8 weeks. I think by 8 weeks, the separation was pretty substantial. The regular group progressed, got worse. The group that was taking microdosing improved several points on a mini mental status exam. This was blind, double blind, randomized. So I think so you can take the links, and the details are all in the YouTube video. So I'm not going to give you separate links here because I don't think I want to spend time getting those things. So yeah, it's all in there. So the study is in the chat. The YouTube video is linked. All the descriptions about the study, the links, the descriptions are in the link up there. Oh yeah, thanks so much for Steph for a reminder. So remember, the beating heart moments are up now every Monday. They get posted very quickly. please do subscribe to those if you want to miss nothing. It helps the channel, but more importantly, you're just not going to miss them. They're going to come out and you can check them out, and they're pretty short and sweet. Nobody knows. There's definitely long-term impact of COVID on some patients' hearts, especially if COVID caused any kind of acute heart problem like inflammation of the heart or inflammation of the area around the heart called pericardium, pericarditis. COVID definitely was causing those things. They're very uncommon. They were more present in the earlier strains. Will those things cause longitudinal long-term effect? It's kind of hard to say. What it's really clear, people who got really, really sick, like there were a lot of people in the first few waves who got extremely sick, right? So those patients, many of them actually had almost a permanent heart damage. Was the the only culprit? Probably not. They probably had other things that predetermined that they will have more serious complications. But in that case, yes, some of the patients almost undoubtedly had a long consequences of impact. And you could still call this long COVID in reality because it is a consequence of the COVID. It's a loose definition. All of these definitions are loose. If you carefully look at the exact definition of long COVID, it has more to do with symptoms. Here we're talking about an actual organ dysfunction, so it's a little bit different. Yeah, so exactly, Randall, that's exactly correct. So in the most recent studies, we're seeing that the long COVID is getting weaker and weaker. So the patients who are getting long COVID now versus getting long COVID 3 years ago, massive difference, or 4 years ago. So most of the COVID now can be compared to the cold. The concerns are it's slightly worse. It's basically better than the flu at this point for most people. Now, that's a generalization because if you have a predisposition to complexity, whether due to the age or history of long COVID before or some other problems, that's not necessarily applicable to you, right? So it's not universal statement. Yes, the long COVID and COVID consequences have been getting better. It doesn't mean that's universal. COVID is still much more heterogeneous condition compared to the cold. Just like a flu, you will have a lot of people with flu who 2 days later are going to go back to work and not notice anything. And then there are going to be a whole bunch of people with the flu who'll end up in the hospital sick for weeks. Um, it's not just the host difference. It's probably different also heavily on amount of exposure that happens to you. So if you picked up a large inoculum, that word means how much virus entered the body, inoculum. So if you picked up a big inoculum, you're going to get a lot sicker. So one of the things that's still really, really applicable is protection. Masks in inappropriate settings, avoiding someone who's obviously sick, asking people, did you test yourself? Like you have a friend coming to stay with you for a couple of days and I'm having a cold. Well, is it a cold? Did you test yourself? So now that's so easy to do, have everybody run the flu and COVID. Now we're exiting flu rapidly. So I don't think there's much flu left. Maybe there is still some, but not much. So obviously, when we get closer to the summer, it'll just be COVID again only. Remember, COVID has two peaks, one in the summer, one in the winter. So we're right in between the peaks. But if all goes like last year, we'll have another COVID spike somewhere around early to midsummer. Yeah, I think, Randall, I think you can start easing up. I mean, I think you can also look at the indoor um, eating out when you have a little bit more space in there. So there are different ways of thinking about it. Like I'm still cautious going into a really crowded spaces like concerts, for example. If I were to go to such, I'd probably wear a mask. But other scenarios are getting a little bit easier. Like I stopped wearing a mask on an airplane for two reasons. So one, again, the filtering airplane is filtered. Two, um, if somebody would be sitting sick to me next to me, I would put the mask on. But otherwise, I feel like I'm gonna have to eat on an airplane anyway. It was a long flight from Europe, so it almost feels like can't really effectively do it anyway. Hmm. So, so wait, Mark. So in New Zealand, you guys have timing is a little different. So you have everything is a little bit, yeah. So I guess it also depends on where you are. Mark, everybody take a look. Mark is saying that in New Zealand, it's summer there now, so they are having both flu and COVID. So again, it depends on the location. True. Oh yeah, that's actually quite important because if you're traveling to a particular location, if they have something ongoing there, you may want to take a quick look and think about how to protect yourself. True. By the way, I'm still a big fan of taking extra vitamin C and using nasal protection. We talked about azelastide. I use the BioClear, which is a colloidal silver with EDTA and xylitol. I don't know if there's no evidence for that, but it seems easier for me to use that versus medication. Um, so yeah. All right. 5 more minutes here. Questions? Jennifer, you want to unmute? Okay.
I had asked a question earlier, but I think you missed it. The on the olive oil question. Um, if the person is consuming that level of olive oil, a couple of tablespoons, and also animal fats, does that make a difference, or should it be exclusively olive oil?
That's a
Not
great
really,
question.
no.
So, if you look at literature, I think the literature about olive oil being extremely healthy for all kinds of things seems to be conclusive. If you start adding animal fat into the mix, my prediction would be you're not going to gain any extra benefit. You're probably going to start losing the benefit. So the key question is how much a little bit of an extra animal fat would make a difference. It's hard to, I don't think there isn't going to be an answer to that. You have to make extrapolations based on comparison of Mediterranean diet to high animal fat diet. I don't think there's a lot of those studies. So you're basically asking critical question, but I don't think there's a scientific answer to
Too complicated.
that can be. Yeah, it's a complicated answer. There's also obviously going to be personal variability. I think there's also going to be issue with genetics. So, if you ask me, could I make a extrapolation for a general? I would actually refuse to do so because I would much rather look at the individual and say, look, I know this patient will tolerate more or less. That's how I think it, because that's a clinically relevant conversation. If I'm going to start saying general statements, they're not practical because you're not a gen. So that's part of the problem with a lot of our nutritional studies. They're not taking into account individual differences. So, you look at I will tell you, for example, comparing some Southern cultures to Eskimos, you would have to make a completely different. So, but that's not how the current science thinks. Like everybody's like, oh, everybody's the same. That's not the case, right? It's a common sense, but we often forget this common sense when we look at nutrition. I always find it quite fascinating that you know, that it doesn't get to that level of specificity it should.
Thanks.
Sure. Rona, that's a great question. I think if the drops are natural, like they're honey based, I wouldn't care because honey has no expiration date. If you're looking at medications, that gets a little tricky. So the pills and capsules, in my opinion, I ignore expiration date. And I know I'm on being recorded, so it's awful, but whatever. I said that. Yeah, because expiration dates for most pills and capsules are impractical. They're using them based on specific studies. They look at the content that's supposed to be 85% or more after a certain amount of years. The problem is that for most medications, that is so far out that they can't even get to it. So a lot of the times they slap the expiration date based on some industry standard, like 5 years from now, but it's not based on the true expiration. The drops are completely different. The liquids usually expire dramatically faster. And so it's much harder question to say what happens with, say, liquid Robitussin. I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked at it, but usually for liquids, I tell stick to the bottle. Like if the bottle says expires in 2 years, that means it's that. But if you're using a natural product that has mostly honey in it and then some other active ingredient, I'd probably just ignore expiration date because again, you've heard the story, right? They found where I read that somewhere that they found a jar of honey from ship that was buried, Roman ship that was buried under the sea for thousands of years. The honey was completely fine. So honey is one of the probably most self-protecting, most self-preserving nutrient out there, and so probably fine. Sugar-free Ricola liquid. I probably wouldn't use that. I mean, sugar-free means there's some synthetic sweeteners and some other molecules, probably preservatives. I probably wouldn't use it. Correct. So for supplements that are in capsules and tablets, things get a little bit more tricky because good quality supplements tend to have often molecules that are easily oxidized. So I can't generalize that. I was talking exclusively about medications because most of the medications formulated into very steady states, it's quite different with supplements, particularly when supplements are in capsules. If the supplement is in a tablet, it's probably a little bit better. Two things to look with supplements. If the supplement changes color, throw it out immediately. If you look at the capsule and it came in bright yellow and now it's dark orange or it's brown, that goes to garbage. Number one. Number two, if they change the smell. So if either a color or a smell, get rid of it. Also, if you have a supplement that says keep it refrigerator, get rid of it at the day of expiration. Things like fish oil, things like glutathione, things like anything probiotics, anything requiring refrigeration, particularly sensitive to temperature. So, you have to follow the expiration date. And if you left it out, I would just get rid of it. So lozenges are going to be a lot better, right? Lozenges are going to be kind of a closer to, I'd probably ignore expiration date on most lozenges. They kind of hard material that, especially if it's still in the original packaging and you didn't open them. So. All right. I'm at 2:30. I want to make sure Michelle gets enough time for her part. If you guys have more questions, you can ask them a little bit later. If you're my patients, by all means, stay after. I'll be here with you to ask you individual questions. Thanks, Michelle, for being here.
You're welcome. Give me 1 second. All right. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Okay, let's go. So I'm so happy to be here again. Thank you to Misha and Janet for having me. A little bit about me for those who don't know. I'm a nurse midwife. I'm also a researcher at GW, and a lot of my work focuses on maternal child health, trauma, and resilience. I'm particularly interested in how something called early life experiences shape health and well-being across the lifespan. Clinically, I've supported individuals through one of their most profound transitions, including birth. Traditionally, though, midwives since ancient times have been with people alongside people for all their major life transitions, not just birth, but adolescence, midlife, and even death. So I feel my interest in transitions is in line with being a midwife. And so it feels natural that over time, my work has really expanded to explore how traditions more broadly are experienced in the body, how it's shaped by our past experiences, and how it's often connected to deeper questions of meaning and identity. So I'm hoping today we can explore a little bit of what transitions might mean and how they shape our inner experience, understand how early experiences shape our responses, especially during change. And a lot of us are experiencing a lot of change right now, and I think collectively we are. We'll do a little reflecting on how early adversity can influence how we move through the world. And I'd like to introduce mindful spirituality, which I think is done a lot here, as a pathway forward towards awareness and integration. And I ultimately hope we all leave here today with a deeper sense of compassion for ourselves and for others. So I just want to take a half a minute to just kind of take a deep breath and be in our body and just call and ask where you might be in your life right now, what feels like it's shifting, and take a moment to just think about right now what feels uncertain or new, and just kind of feel what's coming through with that. So, a transition, when we think about transitions, we often think about external events like a new job, a loss, a move, becoming a parent, losing a parent. But we know that transitions are actually internal processes. They're psychological, it affects how we think and feel. They're also physiological, how our body responds, and they are spiritual, or some folks think about it as meaning making, how we interpret and how we make sense of what's happening. So a transition is not just something that happens to us, but really it's something we're continuously moving through. And it's a really great opportunity for profound transformation. That's something I hope to highlight a lot in here. So again, transitions, we often think about major life events, and these are all very important. They're well recognized as developmental and life stage transitions, but the research shows us that transitions are not limited to just these milestones. They often can be quite subtle, ongoing, and less visible, especially when they include changes in our identity or shifts in how we see ourselves and our role and our sense of purpose. They can be relational if there's changes in relationships or boundaries, belonging. They can be internal when we have changes in our beliefs or values or worldview, or even, cumulative stressors. So what's going on in our community, in our society, ongoing uncertainty, chronic stress, all these can place similar demands on our nervous system, and they can feel just as impactful as larger events. And so, from a biological perspective, the body really doesn't necessarily distinguish between these big and small transitions. And what matters is the perceived level of the challenge, the uncertainty, and the demand for adaptation. So, in that sense, I think of life just not just as a series of transitions, but really it's a continuous process of adaptation and transformation. So when we move through transitions, again, whether big or small, the first place we usually experience changes in the mind. And so from a cognitive or psychological perspective, These transitions often require us to update our internal modes of the world. So, how we think, what we expect, and how we understand ourselves. And this can involve needing for us to develop new ways of thinking. We might find ourselves questioning old beliefs or integrating new perspectives. And the research again demonstrates that growth often requires some sort of process of accommodation. And with that, I mean where we're seeing that our existing frameworks, they no longer fully fit. And we now have to reorganize our understanding of how we thought things were going to be. And this is expansive, it's transformational, but it can be very disorienting and disempowering for people. And especially if those transitions aren't obvious, and they might not have clear markers. But internally, there's a lot of movement happening and a lot of change. So this is a good place to just honor the mind and how it's continuously adapting and reshaping how we are making sense of ourselves and the world. And at the same time, it's not just happening cognitively. This is all deeply embodied, and the body is constantly scanning for safety and threats through our nervous system. When we encounter uncertainty or change and even subtle shifts, again, the body may respond with activation. So we need to pay attention to that. And that might look like changes in heart rate or breathing, muscle tension, even our energy levels. This is all part of our natural stress response system. And the body responds not only to major life events, but also, again, I mentioned this before, cumulative stress. And over time, this repeated activation can contribute to our allostatic load. So this wear and tear on the body from just chronic adaptation. And this can happen just in any human. So again, even when the transition isn't outwardly visible, the body is still working pretty hard to adjust. And then it's important that we recognize that there's a spiritual dimension to all of this, which often becomes more visible in moments of uncertainty. And humans are spiritual beings, we're meaning-making beings. When something shifts that challenges our sense of identity or control, we start to ask deeper questions. Why is this happening? What does it all mean? Who am I becoming? And this is important because it's reflecting this spiritual inquiry that is really important to our human nature. These questions may not always have immediate answers, but the process of asking them, it's deeply important because it opens the door to connection to ourselves, to others, to nature, and to something greater. So just as the mind and the body respond to transitions, the spirit is also seeking to understand and integrate it. And I wanted to present this little framework that I put together because up to this point, we've just talked about transitions where life is continuously asking us to adapt. But what this model is proposing is that when we move through transitions, we're not just starting from a blank slate. Our responses are often shaped by our early life experiences. So these are patterns that have been formed over time in our nervous system, in our body, perhaps genetically. And these patterns influence how we perceive and respond to change. And often this is happening very automatically. We might not even know it. So in the midst of transition, many of us begin to search for grounding, for meaning and connection. And I believe that this is where spirituality enters the room. It's not something separate, but it could be a natural human response to uncertainty and change. It can be a valuable resource. And when we begin to bring awareness to these layers, the transition itself, our patterns, the way we search for meaning, we start to create the possibility for something different. And this awareness can lead to choice. And I do believe that choice can open the door to healing. It would be remiss for me not to talk about birth as a midwife, but I consider birth to be kind of our first transition. And this is, we all have this shared experience that we were birthed. We may not birth ourselves, but, we've all been birthed. And this is our first major transition. And even at this stage, before we have language or memory, our bodies are already having experiences whether they're of safety or stress or connection or separation. And these early experiences begin to shape how our nervous system responds to the world. There's been many philosophers and ancient teachers and clinicians and midwives who really strongly believe that the time of birth is such a sacred time, and it's an opportunity to set the stage for peace and well-being of the new soul that's entering the world, also of the mother birthing person and the community that's witnessing, ushering in this new life. So it's often considered this transition to be a very sacred space. So here's where our early experience come in and shape us. Early life experiences, they play this foundational role in shaping how our brain and our nervous system develop. Again, there's experiences of safety, consistency, and connection that all really support a healthy, regulated, and trusting nervous system and good attachment. But in contrast, chronic stress or unpredictability or separation can lead to this heightened vigilance or difficulty regulating in one's life, especially when it happens in the early years. And these patterns form before we really have conscious memory of it, so we often don't feel them before we understand them. And here's where ACEs come into play. It's one of my areas of interest. ACEs stands for Early Adverse Childhood Experiences. And 30 years ago, the ACEs study originally came out, showing a very clear dose response relationship between something called ACEs and adverse health outcomes. And ACEs are 10 items that include abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction that happen before the age of 18. So for those who are not familiar, you can Google the ACE questionnaire, and it's a 10-item question, yes or no. And depending on how many yeses, you count up your yeses, and that's how many ACEs you have. In the research, those who experience or have experienced more than 3 ACEs is considered high risk and are at the most risk for adverse outcomes, metabolic disease, depression, anxiety, addiction, and early death. But there's a lot of evidence that shows that even 1 or 2 ACEs can really predispose people for adverse outcomes later in their life, or kind of dysfunctional attachment type of behavior and things like that. So this is considered one of the most important findings in public health. The ACEs research expands many different domains now. It's not the only identifier of early life adversity, and it's not necessarily exhausted. It's just exhausted. It's used a lot, and it could be a valuable resource, especially if you're just looking for more self-awareness or looking to maybe understand someone around you. So these early experiences influence key biological systems, especially the stress response. You can see here when these systems are activated repeatedly over time, it can lead to this allostatic load that I talked about, this cumulative wear and tear in the body. And this is how experiences become biologically embedded. Many people are probably familiar with the phrase "and the book, the body keeps the score," which really reflects this concept. So with that, a lot of research has focused on adversity, but more research now is looking at the role of positive childhood experiences. So I always like to talk about both in the same setting because this is important. These include experiences that have had supportive measures. So like having supportive relationships, feeling safe and valued, and having a sense of belonging. Also, one that's not listed is having a strong sense of spiritual well-being. Research has shown that these positive experiences can buffer the effects of adversity. So even in individuals with higher ACE scores, those who report more positive experiences in childhood tend to have better mental health outcomes and stronger relationships and lower depression rates and lower overall poor health in adulthood. So from a biological perspective, these experiences support really the development of more appropriate stress response systems and greater emotional regulation. So this really shifts our narrative in an important way. It's not only about what went wrong, but really what went right. And even small moments of connection, of feeling seen and supported, can have really lasting protective effects. And we're starting to bring this all together. So while early experiences shape us, they certainly don't define us. And one of the most important concepts right now in neuroscience, which I think is exciting, is the concept of neuroplasticity. There's lots of exciting research going on about this, but it's the brain's miraculous ability to change and adapt and form new connections over time. So this means that patterns that are shaped by early experiences, they're not fixed. So with new experiences, especially when we start to feel safe and connected and regulated, the brain and nervous system show an amazing capacity to be able to reorganize the neural pathways, the stress response systems, and again, emotional regulation. So this is monumental. And again, to bring it back, while adversity might increase our risk, it doesn't determine outcome, and change is absolutely possible. And it's not about erasing the past. It's really by creating new experiences that reshape how we respond in the present. So when we move through transitions, especially with uncertainty and change, the brain's working hard to balance and maintain stability. But it often involves this activation of the stress response. And when all these systems are activated, our brain tends to rely on our previously learned patterns, particularly those that are really formed in early life. And this is because the brain starts to prioritize efficiency and safety, and it often defaults to familiar responses. So we may find ourselves reacting very automatically, perhaps even disproportionate to the situation. And this is often rooted in an adaptations that once served us. They once served a protective function. Perhaps now they don't anymore, but we're still carrying them and we're still manifesting them. So again, the transitions don't create the reactions, they reveal what's already there. And I think it's important to listen to that. So when these systems are activated, the experience of transition, it can feel very overwhelming, emotional, physical. You might feel anxious or irritable. You might feel fatigue, tension, or disrupted sleep. Cognitively, you might have repetitive thinking, anxiety, depression. So it's really important that we start to bring awareness to these patterns. You might feel withdrawn or become more reactive with others around you. And these responses they're not signs of failure or dysfunction. They're expected outcomes of a nervous system under stress. And we need to be able to recognize this so we can reduce self-blame and move into this self-awareness and healing. So the turning point, there's usually a natural shift in this experience where we start to move towards meaning making. And this is a well-established concept in psychology. Humans are inherently, again, meaning-making beings. We seek to organize and understand and make sense of our experience. And research shows that the ability to construct meaning during difficult experiences is associated with greater resilience and improved coping and better psychological outcomes over time. So this search may take many forms, seeking grounding, connection, finding that broader sense of purpose. And I believe this is really where spirituality begins to emerge as a valuable resource. And just quickly, what is spirituality? I offer the most recent global consensus derived definition of spirituality. It's, again, a dynamic aspect of our humanity where people are seeking ultimate meaning, purpose, and transcendence, and experience relationship to self, family, others, community, society, nature, and the significant or sacred. And it can be expressed in many different ways: beliefs, patterns, values, traditions, and practices. And really, spirituality now, we're in such a time of overwhelm and disconnection. We're living through this collective trauma and transition. We crave connection and meaning. And science is now validating what wisdom traditions always knew. Nurturing our spiritual life supports resilience and overall health. And these are just quickly some evidence-based spiritual practices, which most of you are well versed in, especially attending these sessions. Meditation, prayer, chanting, mantra recitation, which is really important. Especially with prayer, chanting, the repetition of words and sounds regulates our breath, slows our heart rate, and creates a sense of surrender and comfort, which is very powerful. Journaling is amazing. It helps transform experience to understanding. And even the act of writing by hand starts to engage different parts of the brain. It also helps that part of our brain that wants to control and make sense of everything. It helps shut that down and lets that take a back seat for a while. It helps us integrate our emotions and our cognition and meaning. Some other ones, of course, specifically reading things that might be very heart-opening for you. So those might be sacred texts or poetry or something, again, that just opens the heart. Even if it's just beginning the day with a passage or a quote or sitting quietly for a moment. Rituals and symbolic acts gets a bad rap for some reason, but is actually really important. Rituals help us mark transitions and create sacred moments within ordinary time. And I think that's especially important in today's world. This might be lighting a candle before starting your day or taking a mindful walk after a difficult conversation where you're symbolically leaving the stress behind. And even a cup of tea taken in silence can be a powerful moment, a ritual of grounding and renewal. And these work because they give structure and meaning to our to change. And it's important to honor that. Service, there's so much research on the effects of service and altruism, big or small. These acts of services really enforce our own sense of purpose and connection. And when we help others from a place of compassion, that can be very powerful. And lastly, here I talk about movement. Movement brings spirituality into the body. In many traditions, dance is considered prayer in motion, a way to release heavy feelings and to connect with something larger. In the mind-body medicine world, dance or kind of movement meditation is really important, especially if someone's experiencing very significant trauma. And when we think about that from an energetic standpoint, being able to move that energy from the body and out is very important, especially in times of very significant trauma. So this is a QR code that will bring you to this website. It's a great source of really accessible spiritual resources if you're looking to dive in. I think it's a great resource. At GW, we also have GWISH, which is led by Dr. Polkowski, who's one of the leaders in spirituality and healthcare research. And they have lots of great offerings, and lots of other institutes are really advancing this research globally, where we're starting to bridge together science, faith, and meaning, particularly in healthcare, which is a passion of mine. So that's just a really great place to start. And I just wanted to circle back to this lastly, because this whole talk was kind of walking through how transitions, again, is life's way of continuously asking us to adapt. And our story, our early experiences, they do shape how we respond. But spirituality or mindful spirituality can offer connection, meaning, and support as a resource. And it could be a way for us to start to integrate awareness and choice and healing. And I'll just leave this here. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to talk through them. Oh, thank you. Misha, I thought it was very powerful that you talked about your skiing as this almost spiritual experience. And I thought that was a beautiful way to connect with um, today.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're forgetting that meditative states could be found anywhere in life. They could be done at work, they could be found at work, they could be found in art, they could be found in music, in anything, in movement of any kind. We for some reason forgetting that i- it's not about specifics of the practice, it's about how you're attuned to a particular moment in your life. And I think those attunements can be sporadically present anywhere. I mean, I remember one of the most profound meditative experiences I had in the second year of residency during the code blue. Patient was dying, and I had an instant connection to the soul departing. And I had this profoundly deep experience of guiding the person leaving. I mean, I didn't ask for it, it was just there. And, thank God that I wasn't really busy because there was a whole team doing stuff. And I could just be present to that. And it actually quite changed. I mean, right after that, I decided to consider palliative and geriatrics. It was one of the key aspects of me doing what I'm doing today, because it was quite obvious person was just didn't want to stay and was ready to go, and just my job was to witness it, And so we forget that these episodes are everywhere. They don't need to be forced on us. I think that we just need to be open enough and accepting that again, and for you individually, it could be very different from everybody else. What works for one person is likely not going to work for somebody else. I hate sitting meditation. I was never good at it. It's hard for me. My ADD is just like, you can't sit like this. You got to move. So I move. And I often have by far much better meditative experiences during various movements. So thanks, Michelle. This was awesome.
Welcome. Thank you.
So I think next week we have Paymon reviewing integrative cancer treatments. So those of you interested, please come. Paymon is one of our naturopaths who's been with us for a few years now. And I don't remember who's doing Mind Body, but I'm sure Janet can give to us a little bit info. I'm gonna stick around as long as you guys need me. Michelle, thanks so much for the links. Oh, you mentioned Dr. Pachelsky, so we are recording podcast with her, so hopefully soon. So as soon as podcast with her is out, we will of course share it with everybody.
She's amazing.
She's amazing. Maybe
Yep.
we can drag her into here, although she's very
Yeah.
busy. So we'll see what we can do.
Yeah. You
Okay.
should.
And Catherine is doing Mind Body, so that will be also wonderful. Everybody have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week. And